Should guilt and shame play a role in repentance? Yes, but how long should it remain over your head is the bigger question. So I want you to think about the words in your questions for a moment. Should guilt and shame play a role in repentance? Well, guilt is a good thing briefly, right? Because you feel guilty, which just means that you feel responsible and accountable for your sin. It's like being in a courtroom and you've done something wrong and the judge says you are guilty. No one says, oh, don't guilt me and shame me, judge. No, you would acknowledge, I am guilty. I did that thing, therefore I am guilty. Well, we are all guilty of rebellion against God in sin. So does guilt and shame play a role in repentance? Well, of course, because it precedes repentance. We feel guilt. Now, should you feel shame? I'm going to say it again. Yes. Why? Well, I'm ashamed that I have sinned against a holy God. Think about Adam and Eve for a moment. They covered their nakedness and they hid in shame. What preceded God's grace upon their life and not killing them, what precedes many of us experiencing the grace of God is this moment of shame. We're well aware. Wow. I've sinned against God. Oh, I see my sin for what it is. I'm so ashamed. I'm so embarrassed. God, thank you for being merciful. I see the mirror. My life is in it. I did that. That's a good thing. There's a pastor, though, who once said to me, let guilt do its thing and then go away. So let me give you a second portion. It's not healthy if you don't feel guilt and if you don't think sin is shameful. It's also not healthy if you wallow in guilt and shame for a long time. It's also not healthy if people heap loads of guilt and shame on you after you've genuinely repented and you're bearing fruit in keeping with repentance and they still want to go back on your past. So you read 2 Corinthians chapter 7, you see the response of believers in Corinth to being confronted with sin. They were broken, then they walked in repentance, true and genuine repentance. And we see that God's grace is greater than their greatest sin and ours. And then we walk in joy and freedom as believers like they did. If somebody kept trying to go back to the past, now we are in the sinful use of guilt and shame. Last element of this, as a pastor, my job is to put the good news in front of people of the gospel. Well, it's not really good news unless you first know the bad news. So part of my job and your job as believers, and certainly pastors when they preach the gospel, is to put the bad news in front of people. People are supposed to feel a sense of responsibility for their sin. Guilt over the fact that they've rebelled against God. Shame because they are aware of their offense against a holy God. And then we immediately move to the good news and grace pours out upon them. It's an entirely American and human, psychological, and might I add, just mushy idea to say, well, we don't want to heap guilt and shame. No guilt and shame on you. No, guilt and shame on all of us initially that we have sinned against a holy God. And then grace and mercy and love poured out because we are saved by grace through faith.